So I'm going to present my work that I've been doing on communication practices of children on antiretroviral therapy and the role of family situations in shaping this communication, the variations and tensions in this communication. So this is just a brief background about the HIV/AIDS situation. So globally, about 37 million people are currently living with HIV, and 2.6 million of these are children. And over 90, slightly about 90% of them are in sub-Saharan Africa. So in Uganda, according to the Uganda AIDS Indicator Survey, overall prevalence was 7.3%, and its lowest among children, as you can see, 0.6%. And there's been a steady increase in pediatric coverage. The statistics show us that it's the trend. We'll see the trend on the next slide. There's been a steady increase, though it says that it's still slow, but it promises to improve. But despite the improvement in access to ART, global progress in pediatric counseling has lagged behind. So this is the trend that I was talking about. There's been a steady increase, and it's expected to increase with early infant and diagnosis services, and also with testing and treating all children who are 15 years and below who are counted HIV positive. So this study is about communication communication with HIV positive children and their caregivers. So research shows that the majority of these children are perinatally infected, and most are enrolled on ERT while they are still too young to understand their diagnosis and communicate about it. So communication on diagnosis and medication that concerns them is between the caregiver and the healthcare providers. And children's understanding of their diagnosis largely depends on their communication with their caregiver. So what they tell them is what the children understand is what is told to them by a caregiver. So this has implications for their continued taking of their medications. And there is limited research on caregivers' experiences in communicating with children about their diagnosis and medication within family context, and also less literature exists on children's experiences and perspectives on communication about their diagnosis and medication within the family context. So more work has been done in communication in clinical settings. So how this shapes children's experiences and perspectives on communication about their diagnosis and medication in family context, and how this shapes their communication practices, their understanding of why they have to take medicine, and their willingness to take the medicine even when they are feeling well. So while the number of children, as we saw from the above graph, while the number of children with ART is increasing, many are unaware what the medications are for, or why they have to make repeated visits to clinics, which is really a source of concern because they have to be on these daily medications. And then the available guidelines for communication that guides HIV counseling, testing, treatment, and care for HIV positive children are mainly for clinical settings, and their focus is on healthcare providers. So no similar guidelines exist for caregivers who do the bulk of communication and taking care of these children. So they're the ones who are ascribed the role of disclosing, counseling, and supporting these children. So this challenge is even more severe in resource-limited. So this challenge is even more severe in resource-limited settings where there is shortage of trained pediatric health workers and counselors. And yet communicating with HIV-positive children, their diagnosis, and the reason why they have to take treatment remains one of the greatest challenges that caregivers of these children continue to face. So the focus on communication with children about illness and treatment is critical for their understanding, first of all, of their health, and also the medicines, why they have to take them, and why they have to take them for life, and also for why they have to take them correctly. That's their adherence. Research has shown that focus has been on caregivers and healthcare providers' perspectives and dilemmas on how and when to disclose to children. So, understanding HIV-positive children's communication is of particular relevance in the Ugandan setting where their communication, social cultural context, and various family situations potentially shape communication practices. So this study sets out the overall objective was to investigate communication practices of HIV-positive children and their caregivers about children's diagnosis and hierarchy and the role of family situations in shaping this communication. So more specifically, the study sought to establish the demographic factors associated with HIV-positive children's communication and knowledge of their health and medicines. It also sought to explore the perceptions of HIV-positive children and their caregivers regarding children's maturity and readiness for communication about HIV diagnosis and hierarchy. It also sought to analyze the role of different family situations and caregiving in shaping communication between HIV-positive children and their caregivers. It also listed HIV-positive children's perspectives on their communication practices with regard to their health and medicines in different social settings. So as pointed out earlier, the study is about communication. So this is exchange of verbal and non-verbal information, feelings and meaning through speech, signs, or actions. And communication is so important. It's so important. It is intertwined with human life. And it's intertwined with human life, and its importance and complexities are sometimes overlooked. Communication is shaped by the social cultural context in which it takes place, by the power differences between the adults and the young, the age, the gender, and the relationships and the nature of message being conveyed. And communication practices involve not only the exchange of information, messages, but also the thinking and talking about them in particular ways. So the study, this is grammatically illustrated here. So the assumptions behind this study was the assumptions that were made were that the demographic characteristics of HIV-positive children shape their communication practices and understanding of their diagnosis and medicines. But besides the demographic characteristics of the children, the study also made assumptions that the underlying context in which this communication takes place might shape communication practices of children. And this includes the children's and caregivers' perceptions of children's maturity and readiness for communication, and the implications of different social settings on children's communication practices and family settings, family situations and caregiving on children's communication and understanding of their medicines. So this is the study, the overview of the study methodology. So it was conducted in two interlinked phases. So the first phase of the study was a quantitative, it was a cross-sectional survey that involved a random sample of 394 HIV-positive children with their caregivers. So these were the number from each facility. The facilities were, the children were targeted from 9 health facilities, and they were the number was determined by probability proportional to size of each facility. So the sampling method used was systematic sampling, and the data collection methods used during the survey were interviewer-administered structured questionnaires. So data collection took place between September and December 2011. So for analysis, multivariable logistic regression analysis was used to analyze the data. So the second phase of the study consisted of a qualitative study. So for the children who were sampled to participate in phase 2 or the qualitative study were identified during the survey. So these were purposely sampled from the survey participants. So as we collected data, there were a number of characteristics that we based our selection on. So for example, the different age, the age range from age 17. So we selected children to constitute this age range, their school status, whether they were in and out of school, their disclosure, whether they had been disclosed to or not, and then their family situations, who they lived with, the relationship between them and their caregivers, whether they stayed in foster homes or they stayed in with extended family. So these children were followed up for a period of 1 year. So the entry point into getting these children, as I pointed out, they were identified during the survey. And interaction with them during the 2 months of survey data collection, we were able to create rapport. And also another important factor, how they were selected, was their willingness and accessibility to be visited in homes and in the different places. For example, to be followed up in treatment centers, and for older children who belong to clubs, their willingness to be followed up. So the different methods of data collection were used. In-depth interviews were conducted with 21 children out of the 29. So these were older children whom had been disclosed to. So these were interviewed after repeated visits to their homes and also in the different places after interactions with them. And then the second method of data collections was direct observations and participant observations in different settings, in homes, treatment centers, in clubs and other social events of interest to the children. The draw and write exercise was used with the 8 to 12-year-olds. So these were mainly children who did not know why they were taking medicines. So basically this method was used to to create rapport with them. It was fun for them, and it enabled to collect information about, for example, who they talked to, who helped them with their medicine taking, and even the challenges that they had. They were able to draw and talk to these pictures. And lastly, children who were 13 to 17-year-olds, those who are willing, were given diaries. So they were given diaries to take to home, and they were required to write information that pertains to their life's interesting things, even challenging things. So this was basically aimed at finding out how their life situations fitted into their broader experience of being HIV positive and taking medicine. So the analysis data was the qualitative data that comprised of a field notes. It comprised transcripts from the in-depth interviews and also from notes from the draw and write exercise. So the data was managed and coded using Atlas TI version 7 and analyzed using context-semantic analysis. So the study was conducted in Jinja district, and it was part of a bigger project, Quality of Medicine Used for Children in Uganda. So this was a collaboration between Makerere University, Child Health and Development Center, and Copenhagen and University of Copenhagen, Denmark. So at the time, when I was collecting that data, there were only 9 first aid treatment centers that were providing ART to children. So currently, there are 22 of them. And statistics show us that the estimated HIV prevalence in Jinja district is slightly lower than the national one, which is 7.3%. The study was approved by the Makerere University College of Health Sciences, High Degrees Research and Ethics Committee, and also cleared by the Uganda National Council for Science and Technology. So we also got permission to carry out the study from Jinja District Health Office and also from the in-charges of the 9 health facilities where children were accessed. Caregivers consented for their participation and also for their children's participation in the study, and also children assented for their participation. So for confidentiality purpose and the fact that we are dealing with children who had a condition which is research has shown to be stigmatizing, we used pseudonyms for the children who were followed up, and then we used a coding system during the survey. And we believe that the involvement of caregivers helped to eliminate fears, suspicions among these children, because we felt that if they were the ones who were involved in the study alone, that would have maybe scared them. So this boosted their trust in the researchers, and also the fact that we enrolled them at the treatment centers. And then during the conduct of the study questions were framed in such a way that no mention was made about HIV/AIDS and also ARVs. So it focused more generally on the children's health and medicines, especially medicines, because this is a daily practice in which all children are involved. So, as pointed out, the first phase of the study was a quantitative one, and it involved 394 children. So their mean age was 12, and most of the children, the majority, slightly over half, were female, and they were attending school and in primary school. One interesting thing maybe about their primary caregivers is that over half were staying with caregivers who are not their biological parents, and about 2/3 of these were either single or double orphan. And then for the qualitative study, I pointed out that we followed up 29 children. So again, there were more female than boys, and the age range was 8 to 17 years, and most were attending school and in primary school. And the children that we followed up, most were staying with caregivers who were not their biological parents. And 21 out of the 29 were orphans. So that's the quantitative study established that the socio-demographic factors that were associated with children's communication and knowledge of why the medicines were for. So age was the only significant factor that was associated with children's knowledge and communication about their medicines. So children were asked whether they had talked to their caregiver about their medicines in the preceding month in the month preceding the interview. So the age was the only significant factor, both associated with communication and also knowledge. And then the qualitative study has pointed out that it is sought to do an in-depth exploration of children's communication practices. So the first one explored children and caregivers, perceived maturity of children's maturity and readiness for communication. So children were categorized by caregivers as being too young or immature or mature. So for those children who are categorized as being too young by their caregivers, communication, they were not aware that they were taking medicines for HIV. And their communication with them by the caregivers was limited to taking medicines. So caregivers were asked, these particular caregivers were asked when they intended to engage children in communication about why they are taking medicines. And most of the responses they were giving, they would give the age, but then they based their decisions on their perceptions of the children's maturity, which did not necessarily coincide with children's chronological age or children's own perception of their maturity and readiness for communication. So this was a source of tension between the caregivers and the children. And even though these young ones were perceived as too young to be involved in communication, when they realized that this was a daily practice which they had to take medicine daily, even when they were feeling well, they expressed curiosity and asked their caregivers questions about the daily medicines they were taking. For example, one grandmother reported that the boy asked his grandson that, why am I taking medicines? What are the medicines for? When will I stop taking the medicines? And in response, most of the caregivers of these children who are perceived too young, they gave reflecting information. For example, this one told the child that he was suffering from a lung infection, and others would give different kinds of, like TB or malaria, on and off malaria, and they were doing this from protecting the children. So that this particular caregiver reported that she had heard rumors of a child who was disclosed to and committed suicide. So she was adamant against engaging the child about the reason why he was taking medicines daily. And then the conflicting perceptions of maturity between caregiver and children resulted into tensions. So for their children, the ones that were perceived as being too young, we are followed by those ones who perceive themselves as mature, and yet the caregivers perceive them as still immature. So these ones wanted to know what their medicines were, for, and they were more assertive, persistent, and even threatened their caregivers to stop taking medicines or to stop going to the treatment center if they were not told why they were taking medicines. So these ones were more persistent. And then the older children who were perceived as mature were aware of why they were taking medicines, that they were taking medicines for HIV, and they were not supervised like the young ones. So they were independent and they communicated less frequently with their caregivers. So these were perceived by caregivers as mature. They also perceived themselves as mature, but this was dangerous and it was deceptive, because it was realized that during the course of the study, actually, like 4 months when we had just started, a 17-year-old boy who was never supervised and he was never involved in communication with his caregivers, his parents who were on medicine, about his medicines, he died. And this was because of defaulting from taking his medicines for several months. And then the study also explored the implications of different family situations and caregiving on children's communication practices. It was from the findings, there were variations in communication practices. So the family situation shaped caregiving and communication about children's health and medicines. So depending on who children lived with and the perceived relatedness. So perceived relatedness and nature of caregiving. From the children's perspective, they perceived communication to encompass both emotion and material care. So for my emotional care, it was expressed in messages of concern, encouragement to take medicines, reminders to take medicine, and sharing of confidential conversations about the challenges of being HIV positive and being on daily medicines. So all these were conveyed in a context of caregiving. And then for the material care, it was communicated in acts of provision of food, drinks, counting pills, to find out whether children are taking their medicines, and also accompanying children to the treatment centers, and also being with children when they were admitted. So this is how children perceived care. So this was a drawing by by an 8-year-old girl. So during the draw and write exercise, she was asked to draw who helped her and what exactly the person who cared for her did to help her take the medicines. So children, it was observed that children had different perspectives of their caregivers. So from those who supported them most to those who supported them least. So children living with biological parents, especially mothers who are HIV infected, they found them they were the most supportive, and they communicated more with them. So they were able to talk about their needs and concerns with them. And these children, however, were in most cases not aware that their diagnosis and what the medications were for. So the mothers protected them from knowing. And children who did not live with a biological parent or close relatives, their caregiving was dynamic. So for such children, they moved from home to home, they changed caregivers, and for some of them, caregiving was dispersed among different people. So, for example, there was a girl who was provided for by a teacher at school because the people that she was staying with were non-relatives. She was living with a grandmother who passed away, and she left her in the care of a man who was not a relative, and he never cared for her. So the teacher provided her with courage to take the medicines, and then the counselor provided her with transport money to go to pick medicines. And then there was also a friend of her, this is grandmother, who came and checked her occasionally. So these children who were not living with biological parents were not enjoying the same kind of communication or support with their medication. And most of these were aware that they were HIV infected and they were on ART. So they expressed frustration but their lack of support. So these are some of the statements some of the children said in desperation. So for example, for example, there's one who said that I wish that if my mother was alive, I would have been better off than I'm now. A mother acts like a mother. If my parents were still alive, they wouldn't have mistreated me, and I would have been able to confide in them. So this girl was staying in a foster home. And the study also explored, elicited children's perspectives on their communication practices in different settings, in different spaces. And this included homes. So children's communication practices differed depending on the social setting. So in the home, children's communication was constrained. It was shaped by the hierarchical structure and authoritarian structure in the family, where children occupy a subordinate position. So when children were asked what they talked about with their caregivers regarding their medicines, so the children reported that most of the communication was authoritative, and it was infrequent, and it was about taking medicines with threat. Have you taken your medicines? Go take your medicines. If you don't take your medicines, you die. Or take your medicines. Medicines are your life. To the extent one of the children exclaimed that they hated messages regarding death, because caregivers and even healthcare providers, whenever they were telling them the importance of taking medicines, they told them that if you don't take your medicines, you will die. And then at the treatment center, communication by children was also constrained, especially for the young ones, because healthcare providers rarely spoke to children who were accompanied. So it's caregivers who spoke for them. And even when the questions were directed to the children, the caregivers would answer for them. And even some caregivers would ask the children questions, and then they would give the information to the healthcare providers. But then for all the children who came unaccompanied, they were able to respond to the questions, and also they had favorite counselors who they asked questions. And there was a treatment center at the time of the study. There were some treatment centers that had clubs for children. These were attended mostly for older children. So most of the activities in these children, they comprised health education. There was music, there was dances, and there was drama. And children were in control of the activities. And in some of the children, because at the time of the study, there was only one active one, and children had been involved in the formation of the club. So they were in control of the activities, and they selected topics of discussion of their own interest. And they were more interested in relationships, they were more interested in sex, in celebrities, in music. And they had shared meals, games, music, dance, and drama. And during holidays, most of the children, older children who were in ART, looked forward to spending time in the class, because this is when they met peers, interacted with them, shared experiences that pertain to them as adolescents, and then the challenges they faced. So this was a photo taken at a dance when they were dancing, and then this was in one of the sessions, and these were held over the weekends on Saturdays. And this was also one of the activities, and a health education session which was facilitated by the children. So this study found that only half of the children on ART were aware of their diagnosis and of what the medications were for. So this is contrary to international and national guidelines. So children, and you ask them what were told medicines were for, and it was only 50% of them who had been told that they were taking medicines for HIV. And these are guidelines. For example, the WHO guidelines state that children from age 6 to 12 years should be disclosed to. And also the Ministry of Health addendum to the treatment guidelines also states that children should be disclosed to by age 10. But you find that ideally all the children in our study were in the age bracket where they should have known why they were taking medicines, but it's only half of them who knew that they were taking medicines for HIV. And then also age was the only significant demographic characteristic associated with children's knowledge of their medicines. So all the children knew that they were taking medicines for HIV, and then though they communicated less with their caregivers. So that, as pointed out, that this study found that it was not just the chronological age, that caregivers' perception of children's maturity, the readiness for communication, shaped communication about ART in family context. So, caregivers' perceptions and readiness for communication was not guided by chronological age, but based on local concept or on their markers of maturity. So, our findings showed that the ability to understand the diagnosis and to keep it a secret was an important mark. It was an important mark of maturity, which caregivers based their decision. And then caregivers who are biological parents deliberately postponed this communication as a form of protection, and even grandparents as they waited for the children to mature. And yet children need to engage in communication. They need to know why they're on ART, and also they need to adhere to the medicine. So communication that took place in families with caregivers was constrained, it was infrequent, and it was characterized by tensions. So studies have shown that family closeness and parental warmth shape children's communication with their caregivers in a way that caregivers felt the need, especially biological mothers and grandparents, to protect their children from their diagnosis rather than share it with them. And children who did not feel this closeness, family closeness, those, for example, maternal and double orphans, they did not feel this closeness and warmth. So they hardly communicated with their caregivers they lived with, and yet they had concerns having been made aware of their diagnosis and medications. So communication between caregivers and their children was also compounded by other factors. So for example, caregivers' perceptions regarding the nature, amount of information that children should be given. And studies have shown that in settings like in subsaharan settings, there's a limit to how much information is communicated to the child, especially when it comes to illness and death. And also communication about HIV/AIDS is linked to morality, sexual promiscuity, personal responsibility, premature death. So all these constraints communication, unlike other chronic illnesses like cancer. So this one has issues like being linked to immorality, promiscuity, and it's highly stigmatized. So it's also complicated by parental guilt and shame about disease transmission, and also children's awareness of their parents' illness and possible impending death. So regarding methodological considerations, the study used a triangulation of methods. It had a cross-sectional survey and also a qualitative study that provided an in-depth exploration of children's communication practice. So the use of multiple methods of data collection provided an opportunity to generate complementary and cross-check findings. So for example, whereas the cross-sectional survey showed that it was age that was the only significant factor, and the qualitative studies showed that caregivers not base their decisions to communicate to children about their medicine and diagnosis on age, but on social markers of maturity. And then the strength of this study, it was the involvement of the children of different ages and family situations, and their in-depth exploration of their communication practices outside clinic settings. So the limitation of the study was children, especially in the survey, the data were based on informant responses, which might be subject to self-reporting bias, whereby children can give us desirable responses. But then the questionnaire was designed in such a way that most of the close-ended questions were substantiated by open-ended questions. For example, we would ask, so what were you told? If someone said that I disclosed to the children, then we'd say, what exactly did you tell the child? And then another limitation is that the study included more girls than boys. So in conclusion, age was a significant factor associated with children's communication and knowledge of their diagnosis and medicines. However, caregivers don't rely exclusively on age but on local concepts of maturity and development. And also family situations affect communication and caregiving for communication about children's diagnosis and medicine, both positively and negatively. And communication about children's diagnosis and medicines is more constrained in homes than other settings, as we saw. So, recommendations based on the study: caregivers should recognize and respect children's efforts to learn about and manage their condition. And then continued communication between children and caregivers about HIV medicines is critical for monitoring adherence and for supporting especially older children who are perceived to be responsible and mature. So they need continued communication and support. And then for clinicians and counselors, they need to be more involved in explaining to the children information about their diagnosis. Because most of the few guidelines that allude to communication ascribe responsibility of communicating to the children diagnosis to caregivers. So in cases where caregivers find it difficult, clinicians and counselors need to be more involved. And then in designing interventions that promote communication, our program should take into consideration the differing perceptions of children's maturity and development stage, and also family contextual factors that shape communication and influence communication in homes. And then with regards to policy, there is need for guidelines to assist caregivers in developing appropriate responses to children's questions about their health and ART, instead of giving deflecting information or deceptive information. And they should also train and facilitate peer educators to communicate information about HIV illness and medicine to children, because we saw that older children who have challenges with adherence communicate more with peers than their caregivers. So future research, there's need for more participatory action research involving children. We need to know more of their perspectives and understanding of children's communication about their health and treatment in the context of their homes, because this is where most of the communication and caregiving takes place. And also clinic settings, because for the young ones, communication is dominated by healthcare providers and caregivers, and also in schools where they spend most of their time. So the papers we are published in these journals. So I would like to thank you, first of all, you for coming, and also for the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which funded the study. And I'm so grateful to my academic supervisors who I worked with from the conception of the study until this stage. I've been still working with them. And then the Scientific Advisory Committee of the Child Health and Development Center, and which included supervisors also from other departments. So I'm also grateful to the Makerere University College of Health Sciences and Child Health and Development staff, the administrators, the colleagues who have stood with me in this journey. And then in a special way, I would like to thank the Jinja District Health team and the children and health workers who participated in the study, the research team, the family, colleagues, and friends. So these are some of the photos that we took during activities over the weekends. So thank you so much for listening to me.